Well, to start with, I feel like I'm being interviewed for a job. I don't know what job that is, but I know it's not a movie star.
It's mother and grandmother, and you've already fulfilled it. Now you're getting the interview.
84 years old, and glad to have my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around.
Well, we're going to go way back.
Okay.
What was the first memory that you can recall from your childhood?
As a child, okay. We lived on Taylor Street, and my dad was in the service. I can remember him coming home, got out of the car, and passed me and went and hugged my mother, which was his job, I guess. I mean, that was his wife. And he didn't hug me first, and I was very jealous. I felt like I had been let out to pasture or something. But he did come and hug me second, so that kind of helped.
Do you have any fond memories of your brothers when you were young?
Oh, yes. I was very small, younger than they were, and they would let me play with them. We played cowboy and Indians, and I could hide in smaller places than they could, and I would jump out, and I don't know what designated what we did with the other people that we played, other boys and girls, but I can remember that they would always say, "Let Mildred be on our team."
Oh,
Nice.
So.
Did you have a favorite brother?
I think I was a little bit closer to Gene in age, and naturally close to him in endearment.
Okay. What was a magical moment in your childhood or teenage years that you remember as being extra special?
Okay, let's see. Magical moment. I had an idea that I wanted an underground garden, and I found a piece of glass. It was about that size, about 8 by 10. And so I dug me a hole, and I would pick flowers and greenery, and I would put them down in that hole, place them just like a garden, and I took rocks and made a path through that garden, and that way I could look down into that hole through the glass and imagine myself in a garden like that. We lived in sand land, so it was easy to dig a hole, to build a mound to make your garden on, and it was very easy to dig in that land, like I say, and build upon that garden.
Now, I know you were a pretty mischievous person growing up.
Oh, yeah.
And especially after you married Dad, you could get into trouble sometimes. What was the most mischievous thing you did?
I want to tell some before I got to that stage.
Okay.
Gene and I think a whipping that we got when we were growing up was from going out to the cow, and my mother found us with the cow's udder in our hands, shooting it at each other. And we wasted just about all that milk before she found us. And we were wet with milk up and down, and we got a spanking for that.
Mm.
Now, you're saying mischievous. Oh, yeah. I was talking with Risha earlier about this boy, that young man. He was about 17 or 18. He came to our house with a horse. He was riding it. And it was a big horse. And he was showing how wonderful it was to stand up on that horse. And that horse was so gentle to him, would let him stand up there. Well, while he was standing there, I had a toy in my hand that I had filled with water, and I was going around squirting it on the water, on everything that I wanted to squirt the water on. And I figured, what would that horse do if I would squirt him on the flanks on the back, his back legs? So I shot that water on that horse, and that horse shot out from under that boy, and he fell to the ground so hard, he was very upset with me.
Did you and your brothers ever get into trouble? Besides the cow milking?
Well, let's see.
Any cow tipping, maybe? Just kidding.
Not really, because we lived in the country from the time I was 6 years old, and I can't think of any trouble. Oh, and this wasn't trouble. I thought it was very interesting how ingenious my mother was. We, even in the wintertime, had to walk to school. So it was about 1.25 miles from our house to this old schoolhouse, old 2-story schoolhouse that we went to. My mother, in the wintertime, would give us a boiled egg just taken out of the hot water so that we could put it in our pocket. We only got one egg, though. We'd change it from one hand to the other and put that one in our pocket for a while, change it back and put it in the other pocket. But that we had a boiled egg every day for lunch at school in the wintertime.
Did you ever feel close to death when you were a child?
You know, I could have been close to death, but I didn't realize it. We used to have a hill on the railroad track, and we would jump off of that hill and hit the sand, and just had a real good time with that until one time I hit a briar bush, and the briars on that was about an inch, about like that, inch long. And it stuck in the bottom of my foot on the side and came all the way through my foot and broke off. And I couldn't walk on it because it was so painful. So I left, let's see, there was 2 other people with me, and they couldn't carry me. They were small like I was. I must have been 9 or 10 years old. So I had to crawl home, which was about a block, maybe a block and a half. And I crawled across the #1 highway from the road that would have gone to St. David's Church, which was a sand road at that time. We didn't have very many paved roads. #1 was a 2-lane, one going one way and one going the other when I was growing up. And no side where if a car wanted to pass or whatever, you just had to wait until there was no cars coming. So I waited until no trucks or cars was traveling on the #1 highway, and I crawled across that road. One other time that could have been dangerous for me. Oh, by the way, I went ahead, crawled to my mother, and she put, I think, kerosene on that place where the briar entered, and the briar was stiff enough to where she could pull it out without leaving any part of the briar in my foot. So.
Sounded painful.
Speaking of sharp objects, didn't you have a circumstance with a stair railing one time?
Oh, yes, sir. I did. And that happened when I was about 3 years old, probably. Uh, my mother said, don't slide down the staircase because it's an old wood staircase and you may get hurt. Well, she wasn't around, so I figured I'd enjoy sliding down that staircase, and which I did. But in sliding down the staircase, a splinter that was another inch long, went into the fatty part of my leg.
Inner side.
And it went all the way in. I was afraid to tell my mother about it because she told me not to do that. I thought I'd get a spanking, so I didn't tell her. And that was probably like on a Thursday or Friday. Well, Sunday we were having company, and I told my mother, Mother was bathing me, make sure I was getting a good bath, and she found that splinter under my skin, right there in the, what do you call that part?
It's the inside of your leg.
Yeah.
Thigh.
And
Yes.
she said, what is this, Mildred? And I said, that's a splinter that got in my leg when I was sliding down the staircase. Well, she was a little upset. She said, well, I don't have time to take you to the doctor now, but I'll take you tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and she was going to take me. She looked for that splinter a week later. She forgot she was supposed to get that splinter out, and that splinter had moved. Okay, she couldn't find it anywhere. She said, maybe it came on out. And we never did go to the doctor to get that splinter out. But, okay, you probably won't believe me when I say this, but for years I would have little slivers of splinters that would come out of my fingernail and would start right here where I could see it and would just grow out with the fingernail. And I have seen as many as, I don't know how many, but how that splinter had traveled from my leg to my fingernails, I don't know, but that's the way they grew out. And you won't believe this either. About 10 years ago, I had something that came up in my hand right there, and I pinched it. It was hard, and I thought, well, what in the world? But it was deep enough to when I pinched it, it hurt because the sharp part went to another area. So I went to the doctor then and said, I don't know what this is, but doesn't feel good, so can you get it out? And he deadened the skin and opened it up where he could get a hold of the wood, and he pulled it out. I told him that story. He said, you know, this is old, old wood. And I still have that piece of splinter somewhere. I kept it in a medicine case. I think it's in my drawer over there. But it does look like old wood, and it's small. And if that was true, that piece of wood would have been, let's see, 10 and 3 is 13 years under. It would have been 71 years old in my body. So
Wow.
I don't know if you can believe it or not, but that's what happened.
What was it like growing up during the Depression?
Poor. We ate a lot of, we could buy a can of salmon for 10 cents. That was when my father was overseas. And we ate a lot of beans, a lot of grits, salmon, eggs. You could get them pretty cheap. And it was good. Mother always had a way of fixing food, no matter what she had. It was good to eat. And I have never known of a time that I was hungry. And there was, at that time, there was 2 brothers older than me. And like I say, she could take water in a potato and make soup out of it. Maybe put a tomato in it. And we did eat a lot of soup, and I love soup to this day.
How old were you during the Depression, Mimi?
I can remember when I had 3 dresses to wear. That was before we moved out on the #1 highway. And I had a church dress and 2 other dresses, and my mother would keep them clean. Tell you something else about me when I was just, about 2 1/2. For some reason, my hair wouldn't grow. And my mother, I had just enough up here. I've got a picture with me with my hair curled here, a little bit of fuzz right here, and that's all. And my mother, she would massage my head. No hair would seem to grow, not like it should. So she heard if you shaved your skin, the area, it would grow more hair. Well, she shaved my head, and I was so embarrassed. I would not, she had a bonnet for me to wear because I was so embarrassed. I would cry if someone came around. I didn't want to see anybody, and I would just sit there and cry, or hide and cry. So she bought me a bonnet. I still have that little bonnet to this day, and I wore it. She shaved it that time, and it came back a little bit thicker. She shaved it again when it grew out about a 1/2 inch long, and it came back thicker, and then she shaved it again. So I wore that bonnet for about 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
And it grew out. It was thick, but it was stiff as a horse's tail. And she used to try to curl it, and it wouldn't curl, but it finally softened up.
Now, when did y'all move to the #1 highway?
When I was 6 years old.
Okay. You often told the story of being sent out by Mama or Bartley to look for coal on the railroad tracks.
No, that my brothers and I would go with them and look for it. And we didn't have the experience that Willie had. He said they would meet the train looking for coal. They'd have a basket, and the engineer, the fireman, would throw out 3 or 4 shovels of coal so they could pick it up and have it to take home. I think he grew up poorer than I was.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor occurred?
Let's see, let's figure out how old I was. I met Willie when I was 16. I was probably about 15 years old. So I can remember hearing about it on the one radio that we had. And I can remember even at that age, television was out of the question. Well, it hadn't been invented yet, I guess. They told us in school about this box that you could have in your home and see movies on the box. And I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful? All we can do now is hear the radio. So I was looking forward to getting that box, which we didn't get until I was married and had kids.
I remember the first one. It was a round little tube that we set in the living room. You had to sit in chairs up close to see anything.
They were sort of greenish, blackish, sort of.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, movies.
I don't think I ever saw a movie until I never was able to go to a movie house because we couldn't afford a movie. We couldn't afford gas. We had a car, but it was, you went where you had to go, it was very important for you to get there. So we didn't.
Just to go to church, y'all walked across the highway.
We walked across the highway to St. David's Lutheran Church. And
So
that's where I went to.
You don't really remember the first movie you ever went to, or?
No, the first movie, we went to Lexington, and the movie was shown on the side of a drugstore, which was painted white, and we sat on the lawn and watched a movie, but I don't remember what it was.
What was your impressions of that? I mean, the first time you...
I thought that was uptown. I thought I was living in a magical age where you could sit on the ground and watch a movie.
Did you have a favorite pet when you were growing up?
Oh, I sure did. I would have, our favorite pet was a dog that was brought out to us. This lady that lived in Columbia, well, actually she lived as a neighbor for a while. She had a German Shepherd dog, and that was the most beautiful dog I can remember. And Alonzo and Jean, of course, were older than I was, and that dog went everywhere we went.
What was his
And
name?
we had a lot of good experiences with that dog. But the reason we got the dog is because that neighbor was going overseas for a year to be with her husband, who was in the service. And she said, if you keep the dog, I'll send you money to feed it and take care of it for that year. Well, that dog got so used to us that when she came home, she came out to get that dog and put it in her car and went back to Columbia, which was 8 miles away. And she, 2 weeks later, we called the dog Pal. Pal walked up to our house. Thin as a rail, he'd walked that whole 8 miles back to our house. She called Mother up. Our mother called her up and said, well, Pal is back home. How did he get here? She said, I don't know. He left here and I didn't know where he was, but I'll come and get him. So she did. She came back out there. And let me tell you, in the meantime, that first year I went to school that we walked in cold weather and hot weather, that was during the time we had Pal. Pal would walk with us to school, and then Pal would go back home. And then when we got out of school, and how that dog knew it, I don't know. But she'd be sitting on the schoolhouse steps waiting for us to come out that door, and she would walk home with us. Every day, that's what happened. And whenever we played games, if it was a game where you chased each other to, catch, that dog tore the breeches off of 2 or 3 boys' pants legs, holding them from catching us. That dog, to show you how smart that was, that dog had puppies, and the first puppy that it had, evidently it was dead, and she brought it to the back. It was cold weather. It's probably like in November, and Mother heard a scratch on the door, and she opened it up, and there stood Pal with the little tiny puppy in her mouth. And Mother said, give it to me, Pal, and she did. And she stood there and watched Mother with wagging that tail. And Mother tried to revive the puppy, but couldn't. It was already too far gone. So while she was trying to revive the puppy, Pal had gone back out to her wherever she slept, and had another puppy, and she brought it to the back door and scratched. And Mother opened the door with this puppy was alive, just another beautiful dog, little puppy. And so Mother said, well, if you want it to be in here that bad, she got a box and put the puppy in it with a blanket. And by that time, Pal was scratching on the door. She went to the door, and there was another puppy. So Mother put both the puppies together, and Pal was gone again. Well, she did that 6 more times. 6 times she had 6 puppies. She had had 7, but she raised those 6 puppies, coming into the house to feed them and going back out to play. But she never missed a feeding, and she always knew when to come in and feed them.
Oh, that's a nice story.
Wait a minute now. Did I finish the story about the dog?
I don't know.
I don't
don't
know.
think so.
Go ahead.
We got Pal. Okay, she came and got Pal, and 2.5 weeks later she came back. Pal came back with a rope tied around his neck, her neck. And Mother called the lady up and said, Pal is here and looks like she's chewed the rope in two, and she's very hungry. I'm feeding her. The lady said, that's all right. I'll come and get her. She'll stay home the next time. I'll teach her. So she did. She came back out and got her. Took her back to Columbia. And we didn't see Pal for about a month. And Pal came back with a chain around her neck.
Oh.
She drug that chain all the way from Columbia. And it wasn't a short chain. It was about 5 or 6 feet long. And she got back to our house, and Mother called her up again. She said, you know what? I'm not coming after that dog. That dog loves the children more than she likes me. And that dog has never been happy with me since I brought her home. If you want that dog, you can have her. So we had a dog with us then.
Oh.
And I think, okay, you're saying pets. I had the oddest pets. We had my father was a farmer by heart. He had a job, but he would have, we had chickens, we had a cow, and a mule to plow the land with. We had, I'd make a pet out of anything. A lizard or let's see, we had a pig that lay on one of the little piglets until she almost killed it. And I brought it in the house and put it in a shoebox. And I got up during the night to feed that pig out of a little baby bottle that I had that I was pretending to feed a doll. And that pig got better and finally started walking. And that pig lived by me just petting it and loving on it and feeding it.
Later on in life, you had a squirrel.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
Well, that was when I was teaching driving, and I was had a student, and across Senate Street, this little thing was crawling. It was about that long. And it had a little tail on it, and I knew immediately it was a baby squirrel. So it was wet because it was raining, and I didn't have anything in the car that I could wrap the squirrel up in or put it in. But I had a jacket on because it was cool weather, and so I took the squirrel and I put it inside the jacket, between the jacket and my shirt, zipped it up, and that's where that squirrel stayed until I got home. And we fed that Actually, my children were very small at that time. I had Linda and Danny and Susan. That squirrel, we first started with the bottle, then we gave him pecans till that got too expensive. He was eating too much pecans. And he grew up to be almost a grown squirrel by that time. He never did like Danny or Willie, but I could take the squirrel and hold him up like this in my hand. The nose right here, the legs over my finger, and I would nose that squirrel, and he would shut his eyes and just lay there in my hand, body sticking out down here, and the tail, of course. And he loved to be loved by me and Susan and Linda. But if Danny and Willie got a hold of him, he'd bite them.
Was that Pickles?
No, it was. What was his name?
Beetles.
Beetles.
Because it was in 1960s when the Beatles were hit America.
So this was probably about in 1968, somewhere along there.
63, 64.
Earlier.
You don't think so?
Dan was already in academy in 68.
Huh?
Yeah.
Dan had already left home by 68. So it probably was 63 to 65.
Well,
Yeah.
Maybe it was before then.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to tell you about the end of the squirrel.
Okay.
The squirrel, we finally put it in a cage and would let it run loose in the house. Well, I had an old pair of curtains, and it was tied over like this, draped and tied. And the squirrel made his nest down in that curtain. Well, I could tell by the time he got through that curtain it wouldn't be any good, but who cares? It was an old curtain anyhow. So that squirrel, he lived there for a long time down in there. And he started gnawing on the windowsill to get out. So we figured, okay, we're going to let you get out. We put him out, but he'd come right back in. I would go outside and he'd run up my pants and onto my shoulder and come back in the house. But one day he came in and he had all of the hair pulled off of his head and his face down to about his shoulders. And I said, Willie, something's wrong with this squirrel. We're going to have to take him to the doctor and see why he's losing some water.
Good.
We're going to have to take him to the doctor
She needs water.
and see what's wrong. Well, the next day he had all the hair pulled off of his arm down to right about here. And the next day it was down all of the hair on his, he looked so funny, scant, hairless, down to the back part of his leg.
And it was the
Willie said,
it was the soft white part of his hair, not
all
the
of
gray.
it was gone.
Oh, the back side
The
too?
back side, the front side, all of it. And Willie said, you know what's wrong? I said, what? He said, that squirrel has found a female squirrel and they're making a nest outside. And so, sure enough, the next day it was all the way off. And by that time, the squirrel had learned to live outside pretty good. The only time it would come in was just once in a while, and then he'd go right back out. But that squirrel came up with about 4 little teeny weeny squirrels later on. He never would bring them near enough where I could pick them up, though. Linda brought 2 possums home. And you know how dirty and ugly possums are. Oh, man. But one of them died that afternoon that she brought him home. I slept that night with that possum between my hands to keep him warm. And that possum lived to be large enough to be a total nuisance.
Oh.
We had a cage for him.
A bird
And Linda
cage.
would catch bugs or whatever a possum would eat. Possum would eat that big bug she caught, and the juice would run down his face onto. And another thing, it was Linda's possum, so she had to bathe that possum sometimes twice a day because he was so nasty. He didn't care what he stepped in. We put paper in the cage so he'd have a place when he used the bathroom, when he would poop. And that possum would lay on it or walk on it or whatever, so she'd have to bathe that possum. And when she went away to junior camp, we sent that possum in that cage with her, instructing her, don't you dare bring that possum home. You let him live up there in the mountains.
Yep, we used to go out in the field and catch these 3-inch long grasshoppers.
I know.
Bring them in, and he'd
What was
grab
the
them.
possum's name?
I don't know.
What's a memory, a vivid memory that you have of your father? I know he was
him
gone a
coming
lot.
home was my first memory. And Dad, when he was overseas, he had spinal meningitis. And after that, about once a year, in the wintertime, evidently, he would get another sickness of that. And he would bend way over, and this is the way he would walk around the house for about a week. But he overed every one of them back to a standing position. He did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then he quit with the spinal meningitis.
What do you remember, a vivid memory about your mom that really hits home?
Everybody called her Tilly. Her name was Matilda. And she had friends wherever she went. And we always had someone to come and eat with us. And they usually never went away without something to carry home with them. But we had all kind of, she had so many friends. She had a friend that when we moved out on the #1 highway, this friend, along with another friend, would drive out and spend the night with us. Even though they had, one of them had a family, the other one didn't. Oh, the other one that didn't have a family, she did have a son that had muscular dystrophy, I think. And his name was John. But John was a happy boy. And she cared for him while he never did get any muscles much because he couldn't walk. Could barely talk. We understood him just barely. She always understood him. But he had his hands going and he would tell you something and just laugh, and we would laugh with him, but we didn't know what we was laughing at. But we'd laugh with him. When he was, I think he was about 19 or 20. Right in that age, he was still small. He probably weighed 50 or 60 pounds. He died. And when she had him and her husband found out his condition, he had left her. And she raised that child. I thought she must have been a wonderful, wonderful mother. And my mother would play with him and tend to him, dry him when he was a baby. They had to tend to him like he was a baby until he got that age that he died. But the doctor said he wouldn't live past 2 or 3 years old. But he did.
Were there favorite things you liked to do with your friends?
Walk.
Walk?
We didn't have a car to go where we wanted to go, so we walked. I would walk to my friend's house and we'd play, and I would walk home. I would walk to Kitty's house, and they had a lake, a little small pond that we would go swimming in. That we didn't think about it later. It had snakes in it, but the snakes were afraid of us as we were of them. So they would leave the area that we were swimming. Let's see, we played dolls, but we always walked back and forth to each other's house.
Did you have any little games you played, little girl games? You said
Dolls.
you played dolls. You didn't play
Making-
jump rope or jacks. I'm not sure.
Yeah, all of that.
Okay.
Jacks and rope that we jumped.
Okay. Were paper dolls in during? Did you?
We
do
had
paper-
those sticks that you let go of, and we could pick them up. What they called that?
Pickup
pickup
sticks.
sticks.
Pickup sticks.
Fiddlesticks.
Pickup.
It was also called jacks.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
she
now
said
the
Well-
jacks were played with a ball.
Right.
Right.
These
But you
were
had
sticks.
to.
These were
but you
pickup
had to-
sticks.
The pickup sticks, you would let them go, and then you had to pick them out without anything falling.
Was that what you were talking
Right.
about?
We
Oh,
even we
okay.
played
And then
those
when
even.
something moved, you
Then
lost
Yeah.
lost
from there on.
your turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have told a story about another form of transportation too. You and your friend had mules to ride.
Had what?
Mules to ride.
Oh. Well, my father had a young mule that when he plowed this mule, if he was going away from the barn, it was a very slow mule. But when he turned him around, when the road came back toward the barn, my father couldn't hardly control him or keep up with him. But Gloria and her father had an old mule, and they called him January because he was slow as molasses in January. And so she would ride January, and I would ride our mule. I don't even remember what we called ours, but
Lightning.
it was so much fun. We would meet each other over at a road right there by the railroad track, and walking back, I had to keep where we can talk. I would go around her, turn around, and come back, and we'd talk. Then I'd turn around and we'd meet back together, and I would talk. And that's the way we'd go all the way down. It's about 1.5 miles that we traveled, and then we would travel back. I didn't have a saddle. All I had was a bridle on that mule, that with the rope, the bit in its mouth, and the rope back, and that's all I had to control it. Well, one time we were riding this mule, and the train came. I could hear the whistle blowing. I said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to that mule when he gets here? All that loud noise. Well, that conductor got right beside us and blew that whistle, and my mule took off. And I was holding that mule around the neck, and finally I slid off to the side, and I was taking a step about every 20 feet with my head around that mule's neck, my arms around that mule's neck. And I stopped that mule because I knew if I let him go and he got loose and I never caught him, boy, I'd get a tanning from that.
Well, that could have been part of a death experience right there.
Yeah, it could have been. But that mule finally, when the train got by, thankfully it wasn't a very long train, and I was able to stop him and lead that mule back home.
Did you ever have a nickname growing up?
I can't remember a nickname. I got all my nicknames when after my grandchildren came. My name is Mildred. They call me Mimmy, or Mims, or
Your friends
Willie called me his butterfly,
and your friends called you Millie.
Muley and Willie.
And Buster, doesn't Buster
and
have a weird
Buster
name?
called me Mildew. And I still go by all of those names. It's according to who's calling me.
If you had anything to do over, what would it be? And second part to that question, once you answer that one, what would you absolutely not change?
Well, let's see. I married Willie when I was in the year I was supposed to graduate. He said I could go back to school if I wanted to. Well, I didn't want to, so I didn't finish high school. And I would not have changed that. I might would have gone back to school, but I was given the chance to teach driving whenever Susan was about 9 years old. Isa Method had a car that was a straight shift, and he said he had so much work he couldn't keep up with it. And he said, okay. He said, why don't you let me send you to school for teaching driving, and you can teach with me. So I said, sure, I'll do that. The next day he asked Willie, was she teasing? Would she teach with me? Willie said if she said it, she would do it. So that was in 1962. I went to Erskine College and took a course in driver training. And I taught driving. And I wouldn't change that either because it allowed us an income that we wouldn't have had. I taught for him for about 2 years. I think at that time we were charging $4 an hour.
That was a lot back then.
That was a lot. Anyhow, in 64, I said, okay, I'm teaching for him. He'd gone up then to about $6 an hour, and I still got $2 an hour. And I went to the man that I had gone to start teaching driving, the highwayman, and I said, why couldn't I start up a school of my own? He said, I wondered when you were going to wise up and start a school of your own. He said, you get a name for your school and get a business license. Get your car, that'll have to be okay. Get your insurance. So I bought a 64 Dodge, and Willie dueled it for me, and he was a pretty smart person too, because he had been dueling Tony Sellers, Easy Method cars all those years. He had to run a rod from the brake over to the passenger side and have a brake there that I could sit in and use, and that Tony sat in. The brake, the accelerator, and also another wheel that went through the dash of the car so that we could take over and drive anytime we wanted to. And he dueled my cars for me and Tony right on until underneath the hood of the car they had a lot of plastic, and there was no way to secure that extra wheel because he had to build a frame for it and secure it where it wouldn't shake. So after we couldn't have the steering wheel, I took, let's see, I taught with the accelerator and the brake, and I could reach over and grab their steering wheel quick enough to avert an accident. And there were accidents. One of my students never had the accident, but we would have people that would run into us. I remember we were coming down Leesburg Road, and this black lady came out of a filling station, ran right into my right front fender, and did a lot of damage there to that and to the wheel. And then she got a lawyer and tried to sue me for me being on the road and her coming into the lane. And the lawyer called me up, and when he talked with me, said, well, that wasn't the story that I got. You won't hear from me again.
Mm.
But change? No. The Lord always provided what we needed when we needed it. Like by the time I started teaching ABC driving school, I named the school, had to have that. Everything just right for the man to okay our school. I named it ABC because it put me in the beginning of the telephone book. There was a Baldwin driver training and an easy method, but you came to ABC first because A was first. And my motto was always be careful, ABC.
It's pretty smart. It seemed like there was quite a bit of smart things going on there.
Yeah. I taught driving for 33 years and decided at 23 years that I needed to sell that business because Willie retired. And I knew if I was going to be with him, he wasn't well because he had a triple bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured, well, I need to be with him at this time. So I sold ABC Driving School.
You didn't regret either decision, starting it or selling it?
No.
Did you work for it for a while after you sold it?
After I sold it and they needed someone to help, I did. I worked for them. Off and on, not full time. But I worked for them about a year until it just I was tired of it.
Yeah.
You retired about 70, didn't you?
Yeah.
What's one or two experiences that you had with Pawpaw?
Here I am, 15 years old, 16 years old, and I am gone to a USO Club party at Sesquicentennial, and I had been with this young man, had been talking with me up until time to go swimming. I got my bathing suit on, Kitty got her bathing suit on. We were walking out on the pier, and this young, good-looking soldier was standing on the edge of the pier, and he was wet, and I figured, okay, he's been in the water, he knows how to swim. And Kitty said to me, I dare you to push him in. Well, when I went by, I just pushed, and he went in. When he came up, he was so mad, his face was red. He thought one of his buddies had pushed him in. So he really did get upset. He came towards that pier, and I dove in and went under and swam as far as I could underwater. I was a pretty good swimmer then. I turned around and looked, and he was diving in the water. I turned back around and swam as far as I could, and when I could tell that he was catching up with me fast, and I turned back around to him, and I said, we better go back, hadn't we? And he said, I think I fell in love with you right then. Well, the rest of the afternoon, after he convinced my boyfriend that I'd been talking with all that time, that he was to have nothing else to do with me, that Willie was going to take over from there. Willie said they had had some tussles on the concrete pier, and when half of his skin was torn off, he figured he'd leave me alone. And I stayed with Willie the rest of the evening. And Willie said he kissed me that afternoon, but I don't believe that.
That's another talk too.
But he got my telephone number, and he used to walk from the Columbia Army Air Base, which is airport at this time, all the way to where the Barnyard Flea Market is right now. He would walk out there every afternoon. He'd get there sometimes when he got through at the dental clinic, He'd get there at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or 4, but he always got a good meal to eat. My mother would feed him, and always too late he would leave to go back to the air base walking. And in the meantime, he had a friend there at the base that he actually taught to drive the straight shift, a Jeep. And whenever they would, I guess maybe Dan mentioned this in something else, Willie drank at that time, but I never saw him when he was drinking. He would go to a party or something, have beer. He never drank beer around me. I've never had beer or whiskey in my mouth. I've never smoked because I was 17 when we got married, and I didn't think girls did that at 17. So at least my mother wouldn't have allowed it. But Eddie was the man, the young soldier's name. He would walk to Gloria's house, and our house was 1.25 miles past Gloria's house. Willie would walk on out and stay with me the afternoon. And this was in the summertime that he was coming every afternoon. I remember the first time Mother asked Willie if he would like to stay Saturday night and be there on Sunday rather than go back to the base and walk back out again. And he said, sure, I'd like that. And I was so embarrassed. I went to Kitty's house and spent the night. That first Saturday night, I would stay in the house with him sleeping there. But after the next Saturday night, Mother invited him out. He stayed, and I stayed in my room, and he stayed in his.
Now, how did he go from being pushed? You said he got your number, but did he call that week, or did he?
Yeah, he did.
So he called and said,
He called
"Can I
every
come?"
afternoon until he decided to come out.
How did he know where you lived? You told him.
Oh, I told him.
And did
And
he have to ask Mama's permission to come?
Oh yeah. He asked Mother's permission to come out, and it was about 6 months before he introduced Eddie. No, it wasn't 6 months. It was about a month. He introduced Eddie to Gloria, and that's when he and Eddie would walk out. Willie would walk onto our house. Willie would walk down to Harrison's nursery, where Gloria lived, pick up Eddie, and they'd walk on back to the base. It was about 5 or 6 miles from Gloria and Eddie's house to the base. But they walked it.
Good way to stay healthy.
Yeah, he was, let's see, he was probably about 130 pounds.
I can't believe he'd come every day, though.
He was.
Now that's love. Now didn't you say they would say hold the gate or something because they would come back late and they'd get in trouble?
Yeah, they had to be in by 11 o'clock. And so he would leave late, and then they'd have to run the last part of that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
to get back on time?
They would holler, hold that gate, hold that gate. And the man, he'd be standing there like he was pushing the gate. And if they didn't get there in time, they'd have to spend the night out.
Like out in a brig or out
in the woods.
Guarding or
wherever.
Now, Pawpaw told a story at Eddie's funeral. Can you remember what that story? He told the story about holding the gate.
Pawpaw didn't tell that story.
He didn't.
I wrote that story,
You wrote
and we
it.
got another man to tell it. But okay, Eddie, knowing Willie would spend all the money, he didn't ever have money, hardly any. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't have a car. We didn't have gas to drive. It was during when gas was ration. So he had to walk. Sometimes they would thumb a ride or catch a ride. Someone would stop, bring them on by the house. But going back, they had to walk. But Eddie knew that he would spend all of his little bit of money that he got from the service, and so every time they got paid, Eddie would borrow $20 from him. Well, when about 2 weeks had passed, Willie was out of cigarettes, didn't have any money. Eddie would give him that $20. And that's the way, until we got married, that's the way he did. Eddie would do him. Let's see, what else? And you were saying something, he told a story.
He told a story about holding the gate.
Oh, yeah. I thought about that would be a good way to end the story, because Eddie had passed away, and I said, I can just see Willie and Eddie going, and heaven being there with a big gate, and Eddie and Willie walking or running towards it. Hold that gate, hold that gate. I'm coming. And that's the way I ended the story. Willie was supposed to say something about Eddie at his funeral, but with his help I wrote it. That's the way we ended it. There's a lot of other things I probably could tell, but...
Well, I at least wanted 2 other memories of you and Pawpaw things that really stuck out that you remember about Pawpaw, either a certain circumstance or a character trait or something that just really, that you
Willie
remember.
grew up, from the time he was 18, he had responsibilities. Even before that time, when his father was an alcoholic, and he got worse and worse with drinking till he was just no good with the family at all. So his mother and father had separated, and Willie had to earn money to give to his mother for support to help feed the kids, because there was 3 smaller children under him. And so he would work and bring the money. I think he'd keep maybe a quarter or maybe 50 cents. He could buy a hamburger for 5 cents and a drink for 5 cents.
Wasn't it 4 under him?
4 cents?
4
No,
kids.
4 kids. Sis, Jesse,
Okay,
Kenny,
as I
and Jody.
remember it, it was D.W. was the oldest. Sis was the next.
No,
then
Dad
Willie.
was second.
Okay. Anyhow, Sis, she was right close to Willie.
Yeah.
And then there was Pop. They called him Pop, but he was about 10 or so, and then maybe
His name was
7
Jesse.
and 6. And Willie, in having to take care of them, when his mother died, they were totally on Willie, because D.W., he was gone. I don't know where, but he left.
He had joined the service.
And so Willie rented a house kind of out of town, and I think they paid $6 a month for that
Wow.
house. So you know it wasn't much, but it was in a neighborhood where they had a drugstore on the corner, and Willie kept the children, the 3, Pop, Kenny, and Jody, until he came home one day from work, and Jody was down at the drugstore dancing, and they would throw nickels at her. So she was like, what, 7 or 8 then. And a doctor came to him and said, you're going to have to put the kids in the orphanage. The welfare people are going to come and take them away from you. And if you don't put them in, you're not you're not going to know where they're going to go. But we have a Methodist orphanage, would give them an education, training when they got a little older, and it's just a wonderful place for them to be. So let's get them in that orphanage. And when we got married, they were about, Jody was probably about 6 years old, and Kenny was about 8. But they went to that orphanage, and he had an older sister that was married, but I don't know why she wasn't keeping.
That was Stella, her sis, wasn't it?
Stella.
She got married before he did?
Stella was married and had a child when we got married. So she was right after Willie. But he was strong-willed. I said they named him right, Willie, because he never drank around me. He did smoke, but he determined when he got married he would never drink.
Good for him.
And he didn't.
Never did.
Never did. He put that down, and that was it. He smoked until we went to camp meeting one year. Susan was about probably a year old, and he decided, okay. During that camp meeting, Elder Marley came down off the stage. An altar call was made, and Elder Marley came to Willie and said, would you like for me to walk up with you? And Willie said, yeah, and I was so flabbergasted and so happy. I didn't know what it meant to him, but it meant a lot. He determined at that moment he would one day be baptized. And we left the meeting and went out and sat up under a tree, around a coping that went around that tree. And he said, you know, I've got to stop smoking, and I'm going to be baptized. And he did.
What's a coping, Mimi?
Huh?
What's a coping? Is that a seat around the
It
tree?
was a raised area where they built a flower bed around the tree. But once he made up his mind, he was determined to follow it through. And but during that time, Linda, let's see, I'd had Danny in 49, Susan was in 51, and Willie was baptized in 52.
That was a happy day for you, wasn't it?
You know, it was a big day. And Linda, in growing up, she would say, Daddy, I'm in this play, will you go to church with me? And sometimes he would go and sometimes he wouldn't. But if he didn't, she'd cry. So he finally got a soft enough heart that he would go all the time. And he took Bible studies with Mr. Harrison and with me when I was pregnant with Danny. But he never would join the church. And then he joined after Susan was born.
Linda learned very quickly the rules of Adventism. She went tell about when she went to the neighbors and didn't want to eat
so
breakfast.
Cute. She was about 3 years old, and she'd gone to play with some neighbors' children, and it got lunchtime, and the lady said, would you eat a sandwich with us? And Linda said, I think so. I could call my mother and ask her, could I eat a sandwich with you? And the lady says, well, I'll call her. So the lady was fixing the sandwiches, and she said, what kind of sandwich would you want? And Linda said, I can eat any kind of sandwich except "Oh, would you like an egg
Egg
sandwich?" And Linda said, "I can eat an egg sandwich as long as it's not a hog egg." she didn't want, because she knew she couldn't eat pork. So I guess she thought that hogs had eggs too.
That's so funny.
Bims, I have one last question. What is your first memory of Dan?
First memory is when they came in and told me I had a boy.
Hmm.
And I thought, I have a boy? Oh, that was the most wonderful thing in the world. I had a boy. And I can remember pains afterwards in my stomach. So I called the nurse and I said, I must still be in labor because I'm having these pains in my stomach. And I said, I've got a boy. Maybe there's another boy there. But it wasn't. It was after birth that some of it was still left in there, and she pressed my stomach, and the pains left. But my first impression of Dan was so cute. He had this curly hair, and I kept that curly hair on him until Susie was born. When I went to the hospital, when I came home with Susan, Dan's hair was cut.
Who cut it, Dad
My
or
mother
Mom?
took him to the barber shop and had all of his curls cut off.
Didn't you cry?
I did.
I remember Mama telling me
I
that.
pulled his head up to me, and the hair kind of muffled the harshness of a scalp. And I would pull his head up to my face, and I thought, what a hard head he's got. But he really didn't have a hard head. He's been a good boy all of his life. I didn't lose I guess I haven't lost 5 minutes sleep with all 3 of the children. So we must have done something good to raise such good children. And they're still good. They're so good to me. They were always good to Willie. Never found any fault in them. Dan got here with so many projects that he wanted to do. He collected rocks, he collected shells, what else?
Played the piano.
Played the piano when he was in the 1st and 2nd grade, quit piano, waited till he was 14 years old, and then decided, hey Mom, I want to take piano lessons again. Okay, you get in there and practice your 1st grade books, and if you're serious, we'll take piano lessons again. Well, he was serious, and he did take piano lessons, and he accelerated. I can remember the first piece he played as a recital, but it took him months to learn it. And what was it?
It was Moonlight Sonata
Moonlight Sonata
by Beethoven.
by Beethoven. And Dan said when he heard the man play that, the instructor, the teacher, he said, I cried. It was so beautiful. And I determined I was going to learn to play that song. And he practiced it and practiced it until he accomplished it. When he was 14, we didn't have to give him but, 6 months of lessons?
No, you gave me actually 4 years of lessons.
Really?
But 2 in academy once I left and 2 before I left.
Okay. Well,
It was 1 year with the teacher and then 1 year with the doctor that taught me the Moonlight Sonata.
yeah. But he's good at the piano now. He can sit down and play anything with notes. He's good at it.
I have one more question, that'll be it. And that's pertaining to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. what wisdom do you have to impart, or what would you like them to know about you, so that they can kind of know you a little better?
Every one of our grandchildren were special. We were there for their birth. I can remember when I went to Risher when she had you and Joel. And I stayed with her a week to help her, a week or longer, with both of you. And when Linda had Tony, she was so special. Tara was special. I tell you, then y'all came along, very special. Susan with Robin and Amanda. Amanda was our last grandchild that was born. She would come over every Saturday night because Dan was away with Joel and Josh to another state. Linda and Eddie lived away. Not at first, because Eddie taught driving with me for a little while. But Eddie went back to college. They had Tony, and we would go up there and see them at Collegedale. Southern College is called now, isn't it?
Yeah. Southern Adventist
It was
University.
Southern Missionary College, now it's just Southern University.
It's Southern Adventist University.
And the grandchildren, like I say, every one of them was so special. And now we have 7 great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
And every one of them is special. They come along that just, we were there for everyone. What would I change? You asked me a while ago. I don't think I would change anything. We became Seventh-day Adventists, like I say, when Dan, after he was born. And as a family, we went to church. Willie was there with us at church. All these years, 67 years that we've been married, and I've enjoyed every one of them. Willie's was always such a good husband. Whatever I needed him to do, whatever I was doing, canning or cleaning or whatever, he was, when I would can, he was my cutter-upper. We had to cut up onions, tomatoes, bell pepper, and celery to make a certain dish. We called it red ripe tomato relish. And he was my cutter. I cleaned the vegetables and he'd cut them up. And then we would can it. And we always did it together. After the kids got away from school, away from home, and I quit teaching driving everywhere we went, Willie had the knack of talking to people and telling long tales. He would tell a story, and it was always very interesting. And sometimes he would embellish upon that story until even I didn't recognize it sometimes. He'd already told it so many times, but he built on that story.
He always wanted to make it better.
And everybody loved it. We would go into, as I had retired, we'd go into Columbia, Lexington to eat with our buddies. We would go to, sometime we'd go to Bojangles. We had 2 or 3 lined up tables with our buddies, and he would tell his tales. Then we would go to McDonald's. He had buddies there. Everybody loved him and the stories that he told. And some of them were like like I was when we first got married. I believed everything he said for the first 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I knew he was embellishing on some stories, and I didn't believe anything he told, and half I saw him do. So he was,
I think they call those tall tales.
yeah. And like I say, everybody loved Willie with his tall tales.
Mm-hmm. Well, we love you too.
Huh?
We love you too.
Oh, thank you. I want to say this. At the funeral, there was a funeral home that the director, Todd, said, Wayne said, "You don't have enough chairs in here." He said, "Yes, I do. We've never filled this many chairs up." Wayne said, "I tell you, you need to put at least 220 chairs in that auditorium," or whatever it's called. And so the man said, "I'll bet you $20 that we have enough chairs in here." And Wayne said, "Okay, I'll take that bet." Well, at the funeral, Todd walked up to Wayne he said, "I want to shake your hand." He said, "I was wrong." And Wayne said he came away with that $20 in his hand because the man said, "We filled it, and there was many of them that couldn't come in because it just wasn't enough seating room."
Pawpaw was loved.
He was loved by so many people. I told Linda the other day, all these years since I've been retired, I had one job, and that was to take care of Willie, and he had one job to take care of me. And now I don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Willie passed away last Wednesday, and this is Monday after he had passed away. Linda told me, I told her, "I don't have a job now." She said, "Yes, you do. You have to take care of yourself." And I used to tell Willie that. He said, "What would I do if something would have happened to you?" And I said, "You would have to go and see your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, because they need you as much as you need them."
Mm-hmm.
And so right now I'm sitting in that position that I thought maybe he would be sitting in.
Mm.
He told me if something happened to you, I'd just die within 2 months. Well, I hope I don't die within 2 months.
We hope you don't.
But until then, I have my grandchildren to enjoy. And every one of them, believe it, they love me, love to have me around. They never in any way shown me that I was in the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, all you've shown is love, and I think that's what I wanted to hear. You know, the imparting.
Yeah.
Is that you always loved all of us, and we've always felt that.
And every one of them so special in their own way.
Mm.
Every one of them's different, and that difference is what makes you love them, I think.
Mm.
I just want to be around so I can love on them anytime that I can.
Mm.
Because I do love them, every one of them.
We all love you.
Thank you.
Mm. I think
that
that's
all?
it. I think that's it, Mammy. We've covered
Give me
quite a
a
bit.
hug.
Yes.
I wanted shown you that. Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. And thank you for even wanting to hear tales about me when I was growing up.
Did you have a nickname?
A lot of nicknames.
How did you receive them? What were they?
Actually, I didn't have too many nicknames until I was grown. Like Mammy.
What?
What? Well, you're not doing it now,
Not
are you?
yet.
No, I am.
Well, quit.
I'm just getting part of. This is a process.
It's not on right now.
Well, it's recording, but I can always erase it.
Well, just cut it off, can you?
Okay.
Till we get through.